Darkness lingered at the edges of the courtyard in Winterfell. A hushed murmur carried on the cold northern wind. Jon Snow stood near the old well, his head bowed, his breath coming in thin white wisps. Torchlight danced over the ancient stone walls, casting flickering shapes that trembled whenever the wind gusted. He ran a gloved hand through the fur at his collar, glancing toward the tall ramparts where patrolling guards marched beneath the starless sky. Their footsteps rang hollow, echoing across the yard. He thought of the night's quiet, of the hush in every corner of the castle, and wondered how long peace could hold its fragile form. He had turned down Daenerys Targaryen only hours ago, in a private meeting that took place in the solar usually reserved for the Lady of Winterfell. Though her words were soft, her eyes were resolute, full of a burning ambition. She had not come all this way to be refused by him. Yet Jon, with his heart torn between duty and a creeping weariness, spoke words that severed the fragile alliance before it had the chance to solidify. He recalled her final gaze, the intensity behind it, and the silent promise of consequences. He remembered each moment with painful clarity, a pang in his chest that refused to fade. Inside the keep, flickering candles lit the corridors. Their faint glow seemed to turn the ancient stones a dim gold. Jon passed a few of the household staff who hurried by, bowing their heads. Whispers followed him. "He refused her, they say. Is he mad? What happens now?" The servant's words were lost as soon as he stepped beyond earshot, and he found himself seeking the quiet of a smaller side passage. He walked on a carpet so worn it barely muffled his steps. The northern chill bit at his cheeks, even indoors, and he could feel a draft from the arrow slits that lined the walls. He was making his way to the chamber he had lent to Tyrion Lannister. That was where it had all begun. The seed of this new arrangement, this hesitant bond forged in the swirl of changing loyalties. Tyrion had asked for a private audience, quiet and inconspicuous. Jon had agreed, out of respect for all Tyrion had done to broker alliances in the past, and out of curiosity, for it was not like the Lannister to remain idle while the Game of Thrones took dangerous turns. Reaching the chamber, Jon paused outside the door. A single lantern burned within. He could see the shadow of Tyrion's small frame cast upon the walls, pacing from one side to the other. Jon braced himself, uncertain whether he was ready for more talk of betrayals and new deals. But the path was set. There was no turning away now. He rapped his knuckles once on the heavy oak door, pushed it open. The chamber smelled of old parchment and candle wax. Tyrion looked up. He wore a simple black tunic trimmed with gold thread, and dark circles rested under his eyes. A half-empty flagon of wine stood on the table. The fire crackled, lending a small pocket of warmth to the cold chamber. Tyrion nodded in greeting and gestured for Jon to close the door. Jon shut it behind him and took a seat on the worn wooden chair opposite the small Lannister, folding his hands in his lap. Neither spoke for a long moment, the tension in the room thick as the late autumn frost. Finally, Tyrion cleared his throat. "I hear you have just refused Daenerys," he said, voice low and guarded. "Or so her retinue murmurs." Jon tilted his head slightly. "The rumors speak true. I cannot serve her. Not as she wishes." His voice was rough, as though the weight of his decision had scraped the back of his throat raw. Tyrion sighed and poured wine into a wooden cup, offering it across the table. Jon shook his head. Tyrion gave a small shrug and took a long sip for himself. "She won't take it lightly, you know that." "Yes," Jon said. "I do." The silence lengthened. Outside, a faint draft found its way through the stones, stirring the flames in the fireplace. Jon could almost hear his own heart beating, a measured drum he wished would not sound quite so loudly. Tyrion leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Then let's speak plainly about what comes next. For if you will not side with her, she will eventually turn her gaze north again, and this time, it may be with fire instead of offers of alliance." "Munti." Jon studied Tyrion's face, noting the faint lines of concern etched around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. "I have no wish to fight Daenerys, but neither can I bend the knee and watch as she seeks to shape these lands in a manner I do not trust. Her thirst for power grows, and the North, we've seen enough of war. I won't subject my people to more if I can help it." Tyrion nodded thoughtfully. He traced the rim of his cup with a blunt fingertip. War is a savage sort of negotiation, and we've both seen how quickly it becomes unstoppable once it begins. But perhaps there's a way, some path that skirts open conflict while preserving your vow to protect the North. Jon didn't respond immediately. He gazed into the flickering fire, the flames dancing like ghosts from memories of battles waged. The smell of smoke tickled his nostrils, reminiscent of countless campfires in the bitter cold. Finally, he said, "I know you are clever, Tyrion. You see angles no one else perceives. But Daenerys will want my head if I oppose her. She's already unstoppable, it seems. Unless there is some cunning plan you have in mind." Tyrion's mouth quirked, half amusement, half sorrow. "I did once believe in her. I believed she would break the wheel, usher in a better future. But after all I've witnessed, I cannot ignore the cracks forming. She's lost advisors who tempered her. She's grown used to the taste of conquest. Now with you refusing her, it's more evidence, at least in her mind, that the world resists her rightful place. She might see it as one more betrayal." Now, the wind outside groaned, rattling the shutters. Jon's mind turned to the safety of Winterfell, to Sansa, Arya, and Bran. He felt an unspoken dread settling behind his ribs, the weight of a choice whose consequences might unfurl across all of Westeros. "If you're seeking an alliance with me, then say so," he said. Quiet but firm. "Say what you want, Tyrion." Tyrion set his cup down. His gaze was steady, unwavering. "I want to ensure that no one else dies for a kingdom that's built on fear. Daenerys, in her best moments, wanted to free people from cruelty. But if she sees your refusal as a personal affront, I fear she may become cruel herself. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon enough. I do not want to be the architect of more slaughter." "Nantoro." Jon exhaled, slow and measured. "If it's to keep the North safe, I'd ally with the stranger himself," he said, a wry twist to his tone. "But forging such a path will not be easy." Tyrion slid off the chair and walked to the fireplace, warming his hands over the flames. The golden glow softened the sharp lines of his profile. "Nothing worth doing is ever easy," he replied. "But I have a suggestion. She still holds King's Landing, as Aegon's throne was all but hers after the war. My guess is that she's consolidating power before she marches on the rest of the continent. However, not everyone in the south is enamored with her rule. Some lords fear her dragons, her unsullied ranks, her unwavering sense of destiny. Perhaps we can sow alliances among those who have reason to question her." Jon rose from his chair, crossing the narrow space of the chamber. The scent of snow drifted from his cloak. "And you trust these southern lords?" he asked, half skeptical. "They've turned cloak more times than I can count." "Trust them?" Tyrion shook his head. "I trust them to do what they believe is best for themselves. That can be enough, if we handle them carefully." Jon clasped his hands behind his back. Memories of forging alliances that fell apart, of treaties in the War of 5 Kings, ran through his mind. "We'll be walking a knife's edge," he murmured. "That's an apt way to put it," Tyrion said with the faintest smile. "But it seems we're both accustomed to precarious positions." The talk continued deep into the night, their voices hushed, wine cups occasionally refilled. They spoke of the Vale, of the Riverlands, of the rumors drifting in from the Stormlands. They talked of the North's vulnerability, scattered from the battles with the Night King, still rebuilding in many ways. The hours stretched, the candles burned low until the room smelled of melted wax and faint smoke. When they finally reached a pause, an unspoken accord hung in the air. Neither comfortable nor easy, but present all the same. Tyrion's final words before Jon departed lingered in his mind. "This path we tread. There may be no going back once we set foot upon it. Are you prepared for that?" Jon had not responded with words. He had only given a single nod and left, the furs on his shoulders fluttering in the quiet draft. Sleep did not come easily to him that night. Visions of war, of dragon fire, of betrayal haunted him, chasing each other in the darkness behind his eyelids. When the faintest light of dawn broke, he rose to join the others in the great hall for a meal, his decision etched in his tired gaze. That morning, the sky opened with a cold drizzle, the water turning to sleet as it hit the stone. Winterfell's courtyards, already caked with mud from recent rains, grew more treacherous under the slick of ice. Jon trudged through the gloom, ignoring the chill that seeped through his boots, and made his way inside. He noticed Sansa seated at the high table, speaking with a cluster of advisors. The Lady of Winterfell wore a thick gown of gray wool lined with fox fur, and though her face was composed, he saw a flicker of curiosity in her eyes when she noticed him approach. He felt her gaze on him, appraising and concerned. So much had happened between them. So many battles fought side by side. So many secrets kept or only half revealed. He knew she mistrusted Daenerys from the start. Perhaps she suspected what he planned next, but he wasn't certain he was ready to tell her everything. Not yet. She dismissed the advisors and beckoned Jon closer. She folded her hands in her lap, tilting her head in that graceful yet formidable way that reminded him of their mother, Catelyn Stark. "You look like you've been up all night," she said quietly. "I heard you sent Daenerys away with no promise of loyalty. Is it true?" Jon stood on the dais, arms at his sides. Servants came and went, carrying platters of warm bread and steaming bowls of stew. The low chatter of the hall reverberated around them. "I told her I would protect the North first, and that her war in the South might not have my support." She took it as a refusal. Sansa pursed her lips. "She'll see that as a threat. What are you planning, Jon?" He glanced around, making sure no one was within earshot. Even so, he lowered his voice. "I plan to forge a different alliance. With Tyrion's help." "Men, I know her." She leaned forward. Her red hair caught the torchlight, glowing almost copper. "Tyrion? He's wise, yes, but if you stand against Daenerys, she'll muster the full strength of her forces to crush you." "I know," Jon said, trying to keep his tone calm. "But the alternative is bending the knee to someone I fear is losing her capacity for mercy. I cannot trade one tyrant for another." Sansa's gaze flickered. He could tell she was torn, balancing relief at his refusal with fear of the cost. "I believe you," she said slowly, "but I have to know how you plan to keep Winterfell safe in the event of her wrath. We are still healing from the last war. We can't sustain a direct assault." Jon felt a tension coil in his chest. Tyrion suggests alliances in the south. Some of the lords there grumble about the Dragon Queen's rule. If we can unite them, not in open rebellion just yet, but in quiet resistance, maybe we can force her to negotiate. If we can show her that the realm is not so willing to kneel, simply because she has dragons. Sansa allowed a thin smile to touch her lips, though it didn't banish the worry in her eyes. "You ask for a precarious dance, but if anyone can pull it off, it might be Tyrion Lannister and my brother who knows no fear." She reached to place her hand over Jon's. "I trust your intentions, but be cautious. The last thing the North needs is another war." Jon nodded, the tension easing ever so slightly with her acceptance. "Thank you, Sansa. We'll do what we can to prevent bloodshed." In the days that followed, the atmosphere in Winterfell turned uneasy, as though a storm hovered just beyond the horizon. The dragons had flown south with Daenerys, leaving the sky empty. Jon's people whispered of the Targaryen queen's next move. They counted stockpiles of food, tallied the number of men fit for battle, and carried themselves with the nervousness of those who expect the enemy's horns to blow at any moment. Meanwhile, Tyrion began sending discreet ravens. He spoke often with Maester Wolkan, ensuring that each message reached only those intended. Jon oversaw the forging of fresh weapons, though quietly, not wishing to alarm the entire castle. He encouraged the people to focus on rebuilding huts outside the walls, to continue weaving new clothing for the looming winter, to remain watchful but not panic. Time passed slowly, each day bringing fresh news from travelers. Some said Daenerys was fortifying King's Landing with a new city guard that answered only to her. Others said she was reining in rebellious lords, with just enough force to scare them back in line, but not so overtly as to spark a widespread revolt. One afternoon, after the snows had begun to drift across the courtyard in earnest, Jon found Tyrion in the library, seated among mountains of tomes and scrolls. The warmth in the room came from a large hearth, and the smell of parchment and ink hung heavy in the air. The Lannister was poring over a letter, his brow furrowed with concentration. He glanced up when Jon approached. "We have a response from Lord Royce of the Vale," Tyrion said quietly, tapping the parchment. "Cautious acceptance. He won't join us openly, but he's willing to say nothing if we gather forces. He shares your concern about Daenerys, though he's not prepared to raise arms." Jon nodded, taking a seat. His limbs felt stiff from the day's training in the yard. "That's a start," he remarked, "though not much of one." Tyrion blew out a soft breath. A small ember can become a blaze if fanned carefully. He reached for another scroll. "But we need more than quiet acceptance. We need lords who will at least ensure their men won't march at Daenerys' summons." "No." Jon ran his hand over his beard, the stubble rasping beneath his palm. "We have the North. Perhaps that's all we can rely on." "That may have to be enough," Tyrion replied. He set aside the letters and fixed Jon with a serious gaze. "But I must caution you. If it comes to open confrontation, we are badly outmatched. She has 2 dragons still, does she not?" Jon shut his eyes, remembering the awe and terror of standing in a dragon's shadow. "Yes. Rhaegal fell in battle, but Drogon and the younger one remain. They're formidable." "Gadden." The fire crackled, a slow hiss as a log collapsed upon itself. Tyrion rubbed his hands together, fighting the chill that even the hearth couldn't fully banish. "We have to hope that Daenerys' better nature still lingers somewhere within. That she'll see this as a negotiation, not betrayal. I advised her once, you know. I tried to rein in her worst impulses. If she believes I now conspire against her, she may decide she has nothing to lose." Jon rose, pacing the cramped aisle between bookshelves. He felt frustration building, a sense of looming danger that gnawed at his thoughts. "I can't ignore the possibility she will never yield. If she comes north, breathing fire, do we simply let it happen?" Tyrion's silence was telling. He watched Jon pace, then said, "If she attacks, we'll fight. But I'd rather avoid that fate. Let us gather more threads of alliance in the south, continue to build a shield wall of lords who won't rally to her side. Then, if she tries to march, she might find she's facing not just the north, but a realm that refuses to be frightened into submission." "Natchat." Jon nodded, though his heart weighed heavy. "I'll trust your counsel." They parted ways, each carrying fresh worries to the next day. The days turned shorter, the nights longer. Winter's presence deepened, swirling snow over the battlements. Ravens came and went. Some letters promised secrecy, others politely declined, too fearful to stand against the Dragon Queen. Tyrion pressed on, weaving together what alliances he could. Subtle, delicate, requiring both patience and cunning. Sansa oversaw the practicalities of the castle's defenses, ensuring that if the worst came to pass, they would not be wholly unprepared. Occasionally, Arya's shadowy figure was seen gliding through corridors or slipping out of the gates, though she spoke little of her doings. Bran, quiet as always, watched from his wheeled chair, his eyes distant, as though focused on events unfolding far away. Jon felt the presence of each sibling in a different way, and the memory of their father, Eddard Stark, pressed upon him, a reminder of the values he strove to uphold: honor, duty, and the protection of family. Then, one late afternoon, as the sky burned with a dying sun, a messenger arrived at the gates. The horn sounded once, a call that echoed through the frosted walls. Jon was in the practice yard, sparring with a wooden sword, when he heard the commotion. He handed the practice weapon to a guard and strode toward the main gate, his breath puffing out in small clouds. There stood a rider on a weary horse, the beast's flanks steaming. The rider's cloak bore the sigil of House Tarly, a striding huntsman on a field of green. Jon's brow creased. The Tarlys, after their leadership was executed by Daenerys, had no direct heir aside from Samwell, who had taken the black. But Sam was now a maester in training. Had something changed? The rider dismounted unsteadily. He was a young man, scarcely older than a boy, his face raw from the cold. He managed a short bow, then handed Jon a folded parchment. "Message, my lord, from Lady Tarly." Jon took it, his heart thumping. He gestured for the rider to be given food and rest, then hurried to find Tyrion. He located the Lannister in the great hall, sipping broth from a steaming bowl. Tyrion noticed Jon's tense stride and stood up at once, leaving his bowl behind. "What is it?" Tyrion asked in a subdued voice. Jon showed him the parchment. "From House Tarly. Apparently Sam has a cousin or an aunt. Something. Let's see." They found a small corner near the roaring hearth, out of earshot of the rest of the hall. The parchment, sealed with green wax, bore a few careful lines of script. Jon read it aloud. "I, Lady Melara Tarly, write to you with caution and urgency. Though my husband died under the command of Daenerys Targaryen, we hold no illusions about the nature of her rule. Many in the Reach whisper discontent. Highgarden stands in a precarious balance. I request a meeting in private to discuss a mutual understanding that might preserve our lands and people. My message." Jon lowered the parchment, meeting Tyrion's thoughtful gaze. The sounds of the great hall. Spoons clinking on wooden bowls, quiet conversations, the crackling logs, felt distant. Tyrion's brow was furrowed. "A Tarly lady we've not heard of," he said. "She might be the widow of a lesser Tarly cousin. But interesting that she has the resources to make contact like this." Jon nodded, folding the parchment. "She mentions the Reach's discontent. If they're unhappy with Daenerys' presence in King's Landing, we could have a powerful new ally." Tyrion ran his tongue over his lips, as though trying to taste the nuances of this situation. "We must proceed carefully. Any open alliance with the Tarly name will draw Daenerys' attention. But if she truly controls some portion of the Reach, that region's food supply could be ours to secure or deny." Jon felt a flicker of hope, quickly tempered by caution. "We should respond, arrange a secret meeting somewhere neutral. If the Tarly widow is genuine, we might have a chance to secure more support." They exchanged a few more words, settling on how to answer, then departed to prepare. That night, Tyrion penned a careful response to Lady Melara, offering to meet near the southwestern fringes of the Riverlands, far enough from King's Landing to avoid suspicion, but also not so close to the north that it would be impractical. They set a time 2 fortnights from now, allowing for safe travel. Jon wondered if Daenerys spies would catch wind of it, but they had few alternatives. The passing days saw preparations for the journey. Jon selected a small escort, no more than a dozen men, sworn to secrecy. Tyrion, of course, would accompany him, along with a handful of loyal northern riders. They would wear plain cloaks, no banners, hoping to pass unnoticed in the cold roads that wound southward. Sansa fretted over the potential risks, but she also recognized the necessity. If they were to avoid a direct clash with Daenerys' forces, they needed allies. Real allies. Not just words in ravens. Finally, the day arrived. The morning sky was a bleak, pale gray, promising more snow. Jon rose before dawn, stepping into the courtyard where the horses were saddled. He pulled his cloak around his shoulders. The faint glow of lanterns revealed the frosty breath of the stable hands, the quiet snorts of the horses shifting in place. Tyrion emerged, bundled in heavy layers, looking slightly miserable at the thought of riding through the bitter cold. But he mounted his pony, short in stature but sturdy, and set his jaw in determination. Jon surveyed the small group of riders. A hush fell as they prepared to depart. Behind the gates, the winter landscape stretched away, barren trees and patches of snow. He glanced back at Winterfell. Its towering walls, the puffs of smoke rising from chimneys. A part of him longed to remain, to protect his home from within these walls. But he had sworn to do everything possible to keep the North safe from tyranny, and this mission was part of that vow. With a nod to the guards, the gates were opened. Hooves crunched on the frozen ground as they passed beyond the thick walls and into the open road. Tyrion pulled his hood up, half concealing his features. The men fanned out, forming a loose formation, watchful for any sign of trouble. For the first few days, they rode in relative silence, the cold wind biting at their faces. Jon led the way, relying on the knowledge of the northern paths he'd traveled countless times before. Sparse woodland gave way to rolling hills covered in a thin blanket of white. Occasionally they encountered small villages, where they stopped for fresh water and scant supplies. They kept their identities hidden, passing as traders or messengers. The people they met were too weary or too busy surviving the winter to ask many questions. At night, they huddled around campfires, the stars veiled by thick clouds. Tyrion would bring out a small flask of warming liquor, offering it around. Most men drank gratefully, trying to chase the chill from their bones. Jon kept watch with an intensity that allowed him little rest. He remembered how quickly a simple journey could turn into bloodshed if the wrong band of sellswords or rival scouts appeared. The memory of the dangers on the road, even without the looming threat of the Dragon Queen, hung over him. On the 7th day, they crossed the boundary into the riverlands, where patches of snow mingled with muddy farmland. The trees were more numerous here, forming small copses and thickets. Streams trickled with half-frozen water, the banks lined with fragile ice that cracked under the weight of their horses' hooves. They pressed on, guided by rough maps in Tyrion's possession, until at last they came upon the location designated for the meeting. A modest inn perched near a crossroads, close to a winding river. Smoke rose from the inn's chimney, promising warmth and shelter. They arrived near dusk. The inn was quiet, a single lantern glowing near the door. Jon dismounted, instructing half his men to remain outside, watchful. Tyrion slid from his pony, grimacing as he stretched his stiff legs. Together, they approached the inn's door. A tall woman with straw-colored hair ushered them in, eyeing the group warily. Tyrion requested 2 rooms and a private table by the fire. Inside, the common room smelled of roasted turnips and stale ale. An old hound dozed by the hearth, occasionally twitching in its sleep. The floor was rough wooden planks, worn by countless travelers' boots. Tyrion and Jon took seats at a corner table, near enough to the fire to feel its soothing heat. One by one, the men filed in, scraping chairs across the floor, but leaving empty seats where Lady Melara's retinue might join them. They ordered food, simple fare of bread, stew, and cheap wine. Jon ate little, his mind too full of tension. The minutes dragged, each glance at the door bringing a rise in his pulse. Was this a trap? Would a band of Daenerys loyalists come crashing through, swords drawn? Then, at last, the door swung open. A trio of figures entered. 2 knights in mail, 1 woman in a cloak of dark green. She slid the hood back, revealing sharp features and hair the color of ash. She surveyed the room, her gaze alighting on Jon and Tyrion, the only table in the corner with vacant chairs waiting. In her expression, Jon sensed caution, but also determination. She crossed the floor, the knights staying close behind. The innkeeper shrank away, as though sensing the gravity of this rendezvous. Tyrion rose with a small bow, though he kept one hand near his belt, where a dagger was hidden beneath his cloak. Jon inclined his head in greeting, gesturing to the empty chairs. The woman sat, her knights standing just behind her, arms folded. A moment of silence stretched. The fire popped in the hearth. Lady Melara regarded them, measuring their faces, their posture. Then she spoke in a voice that was quieter than Jon expected, but laced with controlled strength. "I am Melara Tarly. You are Jon Snow, the king in the north once, or so the tales say. And you, of course, Tyrion Lannister." Tyrion gave a polite smile. "I can't deny my identity much as I might sometimes wish to. It's an honor to meet you, Lady Melara." She offered a curt nod. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. The roads grow more dangerous each day. Daenerys Targaryen has eyes everywhere." Jon leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table. "Your message suggested you have no love for the Dragon Queen. Given what happened to House Tarly's previous lord, I can't say I'm surprised." Melara's lips pressed into a thin line. "Randall Tarly and his son Dickon were lost to dragonfire for refusing to bend the knee. My own husband fell shortly after, a casualty of that same war." Her voice trembled slightly, but she steadied herself. "I do not deny that House Tarly was loyal to the crown, or that they opposed Daenerys openly. But she showed them no mercy. Now she seeks to rule through fear, or so it appears to many. The Lords of the Reach remember, They nurse their wounds in silence. Tyrion's gaze flicked to Jon. Then we share a concern. House Tarly wants no part in Daenerys' future. We, as you must know, do not wish to see her ascend without limits. Noam. Melara nodded slowly, removing her gloves to warm her hands by the fire. Her knuckles were red from the cold. I am no fool. If Daenerys learns of this meeting, my life is forfeit. But if I stand idle, soon the entire Reach will be nothing but farmland to feed her armies. She only grants favor to those who bow completely. Jon's jaw tensed. We don't want war, Lady Melara. Our hope is to prevent it. But we cannot allow Daenerys to seize the north without challenge. We suspect there are others in the south who share your doubts. Nain. Gamal? Melara cast a glance at the knights behind her. One gave a nearly imperceptible nod, as though reassuring her. Indeed. Some minor houses speak of rebellion, but they are fractured, unsure if the time is right. They fear the dragons above all else. Will your north stand firm if she takes to the skies and burns your holds? Jon hesitated, thinking of the last war, of how many had died. We will not be cowed, he said at last. Voice quiet, but resolute. We have faced terrors beyond mortal comprehension. We fear the cost, but we will not yield to tyranny. Moan. Indansor. Melara's gaze shifted, a faint respect gleaming there. If you can truly stand, then perhaps we can weave a tapestry of resistance, though it must remain hidden for now, until we have enough backing to force her hand toward a fair negotiation, or her downfall, if it comes to that. Tyrion folded his hands on the table. There is much to discuss, Lady Melara, and little time. We've only just begun forging quiet alliances. We have some support in the Vale, and we hope to gather more in the Riverlands. If you can promise the Reach will not supply her forces with grain or manpower, that alone would be a blow to her. Then Sistan. Her expression hardened with resolve. I can promise you that if I am convinced it will matter, if I see that we are not alone in defiance, I will do what I can to starve her armies. But understand, many of my people are already near the brink. Withhold too many supplies, and they might suffer. Jon touched the tabletop with his fingertips, feeling the rough grain of the wood. We'll do everything in our power to ensure they don't. Once we're certain of our combined strength, we'll move carefully. The point is not to spark war, but to show Daenerys she cannot simply subjugate Westeros. Then to Belwano. Melara eyed them both in turn, weighing their words. Silence stretched, the fire spitting a spark that danced over the hearth. At last, she let out a long breath. I will stand with you. But be warned, if Daenerys learns of this, her reprisal could be swift. We must cloak our intentions behind loyalty, until the moment is right. Jon felt a flicker of something akin to hope stirring beneath the layers of wariness. He extended his hand across the table. After a breath's hesitation, Melara placed her smaller hand in his. We have an accord then, he said. Her grip was firm. For the next hour they spoke in hushed tones, exchanging details on how to communicate safely. Tyrion listed the names of lesser lords who might be receptive. Melara offered insight into the tension within King's Landing itself. Each piece was a step forward in a dangerous game, all of them acutely aware of the sword dangling overhead. Eventually Melara rose, her green cloak whispering over the wooden floor. I must go, she said quietly. We risk too much if we linger. She glanced at Jon. We will be ready when the time comes. He gave a single nod, feeling the weight of the moment. Her knights pulled the door open, letting in a gust of frigid air. Without further ceremony, the Tarly widow slipped out into the night, her footsteps dissolving into the hush of wind. Jon and Tyrion lingered at the table, the firelight carving flickering shadows across their faces. Outside, the men of Winterfell remained watchful. Tyrion took a sip of wine, lips pressed thin. We have a foothold, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Perhaps just enough to begin. Jon's voice was grim but resolute. The next step is to ensure Daenerys does not discover it before we're ready. They sat there in the dim glow, neither speaking further, both contemplating the enormity of what they'd set in motion. The wind howled outside the inn, a haunting echo in the blackness. For a moment John allowed himself to remember another time, another place, when all he had to worry about was keeping the night's watch safe. Now, he walked a path that could reshape the fate of Westeros itself. Tyrion, for his part, stared into the fire, as though seeking answers in the dancing flames. Every flicker cast a fresh shadow on the wall, each one like a ghost of the battles yet to come. When the innkeeper finally came to ask if they needed more stew, they politely declined. The food they'd eaten seemed tasteless in the wake of such negotiations, and neither man had the appetite for more. In companionable silence, they rose from the table, each lost in his own thoughts. The men outside were anxious to know how the meeting had fared, but John held their questions at bay with a curt assurance that it had gone well. That night, as they made camp a short distance from the inn, to avoid any prying ears, John found himself staring at the broad sky, the stars half obscured by passing clouds. Tyrion joined him, pulling his cloak closer. "The Tarly widow is bolder than I expected," Tyrion said quietly. "We'll need more like her." John nodded. "We'll find them, or we'll fail." His voice was calm, but inside, he felt the churn of nerves. "I just hope this is not all for nothing. Should Daenerys come for our heads, I don't want the North to pay that price." Tyrion glanced at him, a shadow of sympathy in his gaze. "And I don't want my conscience to bear the guilt of unleashing more carnage. Let's pray our cunning outpaces her wrath." A cold wind brushed across them, stirring the edges of their cloaks. The campfires crackled in the distance, men's murmurs drifting through the dark. Somewhere, an owl hooted, a lonely cry. John closed his eyes, letting the chill sink into him, thinking of Daenerys' eyes when he had last seen her. He recalled the hurt, the anger, the growing arrogance. He wondered if there was a shred of hope left in her that might be reasoned with, or if that hope was long snuffed out by ambition and the taste of power. They would know soon enough, he thought. The pieces were on the board, each alliance carefully hidden for now. He wondered if the next move would come from them, or if Daenerys herself would strike before they were ready. In the hush of the starlit night, he felt the hush of something else, like the calm before a raging storm. A single question repeated in his mind: how far would they have to go to keep the North free from fire and blood? He did not know the answer, but he felt Tyrion's presence beside him, and that was something. For now, it would have to be enough. The morning after their meeting with Lady Melara, John stood on the small rise behind the inn, facing the east. The sky was a shifting tapestry of pink and gold, a promise of daylight that arrived too slowly. The brisk wind carried the scent of the river and the brittle tang of winter. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to clear his mind of the mounting tensions. Beneath his boots, the ground felt frozen solid, each blade of grass stiff and unyielding. Tyrion joined him quietly, stepping with care so as not to slip on the thin crust of snow. His breath ghosted in the air. He glanced sideways at John, his face serious. "We should ride soon," he said, lowering his voice as if he feared the morning might be listening. "The fewer eyes that see us, the better." John gave a curt nod. He barely slept, haunted by uneasy dreams of fire devouring the north, of Daenerys dragons ravaging the ramparts of Winterfell. He tried to shake the images. "Mount up," he said, turning to where their handful of riders stood with the horses. "We'll ride north until we clear these lands, then skirt the King's Road." They moved quickly, leaving the lonely inn behind. The wooden sign swung in the breeze, creaking faintly as they passed. Lady Melara and her guards had set out earlier, heading in a southwest arc. John and Tyrion rode in silence for a time, each lost in thought. The day was cold but clear, sunlight glinting off patches of snow that glittered like shards of crystal. Whenever John or Tyrion glanced back, they saw only the empty road bending away behind them. By midday, they reached a place where the river widened, its banks dotted with skeletal willow trees. Frozen reeds along the edge rattled in the breeze, a soft crackling that sounded eerily like whispers. They paused to water the horses, letting them drink at the sluggish, half-iced water. John's stallion snorted, stamping at the cold ground. Nearby, Tyrion's pony pawed restlessly, as if eager to be away from exposed terrain. The men kept a sharp lookout, hands resting on sword hilts or ready on bows, though the day remained uneventful. They pushed on, traveling until dusk before finding a suitable spot for camp amid a cluster of leafless trees. The ground was free of deep snow there, and a half-toppled stone wall provided some shelter against the night wind. Jon helped raise a canvas tarp, staking it against the wall to create a crude barrier. Small fires were lit, carefully, using dried brush scavenged from beneath the snow. In the flickering glow, the men gathered to eat salt beef and stale bread, with only a thin stew to warm their bellies. Tyrion sat near Jon, his back propped against the remnants of the wall, his cloak pulled tight. He cradled a cup of watered wine in his hands, sipping slowly. "We must consider our next moves carefully," he remarked, gaze flicking over the fire's dancing flames. "We have Lady Malara's quiet pledge, and perhaps a few lords in the Vale who are equally discreet. Yet Daenerys still holds a great advantage: open power." Angel. Jon accepted his own cup, though he scarcely tasted the contents. "I know. Sansa was already concerned before we left Winterfell. If Daenerys decides to strike first, we stand little chance of repelling an assault by dragons." Tyrion set the cup aside, exhaling. "She may bide her time. Ruling a conquered city isn't simple. King's Landing is always on the brink of riot or conspiracy. She'll also be wary of the Iron Islands, I imagine. Yara Greyjoy might still be a thorn in her side, and the Stormlands remain precarious. But sooner or later, she'll look north again." Century. Jon's gaze wandered to the dark horizon. The trees shifted and bent under the wind, their branches scraping each other in a slow, mournful sound. "We'll be ready," he said softly, not fully convinced by his own words. He wanted to believe it, that the North could hold, that alliances could be formed in time. At length they turned in, drawing cloaks around their bodies to seal in what little warmth remained. Sleep came fitfully. Jon dreamt of Daenerys again, this time seeing her in a white wasteland, her silver hair tangled with frost, eyes filled with fire. He heard dragons shrieking, felt the sting of cinders on his skin. Then there was a rush of wind, and he found himself on a battlement in Winterfell, alone, as shadows of winged beasts circled overhead. When he awoke with a gasp, he found only the silent gloom of their makeshift camp and the soft snores of tired men. They pressed north the next day, making better time on the firmer ground. Occasionally, they crossed paths with wandering merchants or small groups of travelers. Jon always pulled his hood low, letting Tyrion do the talking. Most folk in these parts recognized neither the short-statured Lannister nor the quiet man in the thick fur cloak. To anyone who asked, they were a band of free riders escorting goods back to the north. The cover story was simple enough that no one seemed to question it. On the fourth day, the landscape changed, growing starker. Bare trees gave way to open fields crusted in ice, and the wind snapped sharply at them. Once, they spotted the silhouette of a large group, far in the distance. Riders, perhaps. Jon tensed, half ready to order his men off the road to avoid detection. But the group did not alter its course, and soon both parties were swallowed by the rolling terrain. Nightfall found them at the edge of familiar territory. Low hills, dusted white, reminded Jon of hunts he'd once taken part in during his youth at Winterfell. They stopped near a narrow creek, the waters dark and cold. While the men pitched tents with practiced efficiency, Tyrion joined Jon in scouting a short distance beyond. They stepped carefully, mindful of uneven ground. The sky had turned a deep indigo, faint stars flickering through thin clouds. Jon knelt beside a lonely pine, examining hoofprints frozen into the muddy bank. "A patrol," he surmised. "Northern men maybe. Could be a small band from the Dreadfort or Last Hearth." Tyrion squinted in the dim light. "They look days old, at least. Let's hope it isn't a roving band loyal to Daenerys." Even as he said it, he let out a small, ironic laugh. "I doubt she has many loyalists so far from King's Landing. Still, we can't be too careful." They returned to the camp, exchanging a few quiet words with their guards. The men built a larger fire than usual, safe in the knowledge that the territory ahead was friendlier. As they settled around the flames, talk shifted toward what awaited them back at Winterfell. One grizzled rider, a man named Urek, admitted to missing the warmth of the castle's hearth and the strong ale from the northern stock. Another man, Clyden, spoke of loved ones, an aging mother in a nearby village. Tyrion's mood, too, seemed lighter. Perhaps it was the proximity to safety, or the sense of cautious optimism gained from forging that fragile alliance with House Tarly's widow. He told a quiet jest about the old days in King's Landing, how once a donkey was rumored to have more sense than a certain Lannister cousin. The men chuckled softly, though the jokes were tinged with weariness. Jon almost managed a half-smile before his expression turned somber again. "It'll be strange," Jon murmured as the laughter died, returning with a new burden of secrets. Tyrion tilted his head in mild agreement. "Secrets can be heavier than physical chains. Let us hope ours serve a purpose worth the wait." Jon nodded, gaze reflecting the dancing firelight. "We have no choice now. We set this path ourselves. We have to see it through." When they broke camp at dawn, frost clung to the tents and their breath curled in the sharp air. The sky was a quiet gray, foretelling another cold and possibly snowy day. They mounted their horses, the animals' hooves crunching over the frozen ground. Each mile north brought them closer to Winterfell. Yet Jon felt no relief stirring in his chest, only the persistent, throbbing awareness that every day spent planning was another day Daenerys could use to tighten her grip on the south. By late afternoon they glimpsed the outer farms that dotted the approach to Winterfell. Smoke rose from a scattering of small huts, and laborers in thick wool clothes chopped firewood or tended meager livestock. Many paused to watch the travelers pass, their faces wary but not hostile. Some recognized the man at the head of the party, or so it seemed, for they quietly bowed or offered a tip of the hat. Jon did not pause to speak, though he acknowledged them with a respectful nod. Soon, the familiar outlines of Winterfell's walls came into view, rising from the snowy expanse like a colossal stone guardian. The sight of home stirred conflicting feelings in Jon, relief to see it standing strong, mingled with dread for the conflicts that lay ahead. He thought of Sansa, of how he must share the news of the Tarly alliance. He wondered how Arya had kept herself occupied. As for Bran, Jon suspected his younger brother might already know more than any of them. They rode through the gates under a sky darkening to dusk. Torches burned along the ramparts, and guards called out in recognition of their returning lord. Steam curled upward from the kitchens, carrying the sense of cooking meat and bread. Jon guided his stallion into the courtyard, where stable hands rushed to help them dismount. Tyrion slipped down from his pony with a grunt, shaking out his legs. A hush fell over the courtyard as Sansa appeared at the top of the steps leading to the great hall. She wore a dark cloak trimmed in fur, her face poised in quiet composure. Jon felt a pang of guilt for having been gone so long, though he knew it was necessary. He walked toward her, and she descended a few steps to meet him halfway. The wind stirred her red hair, making it shimmer in the torchlight. "Welcome back," she said, her tone subdued but not cold. "I was expecting you at least a day ago." Jon bowed his head in acknowledgement. "We traveled slower than planned. We had an important meeting, best discussed in private." Her eyes flicked to Tyrion, and then back to Jon. She nodded once. "Let's go inside before the cold makes statues of us all." They retreated into the great hall. The heat of the massive fireplace enveloped them, warming chilled limbs. Household staff bustled about, clearing the remnants of the evening meal. Long trestle tables were mostly vacant, but a few men-at-arms lingered over cups of ale. Sansa dismissed them with a wordless gesture, and they rose to depart with murmured bows. Jon, Tyrion, and Sansa took seats near the high table, where the light of the hearth was strongest. A single candle flickered on the table's edge, illuminating their faces, but leaving much of the hall in deep shadow. For a moment, no one spoke. Sansa regarded them both with an intent gaze, her hands folded neatly on her lap. Jon broke the silence. "We met with Lady Melara Tarly in the Riverlands. She's willing to stand with us if Daenerys tries to force the Reach under her thumb again." Sansa's expression did not flicker. "The Tarly family has reason to hate Daenerys, after what she did to their lord and heir. But Lady Melara..." I thought she was a lesser branch. Are you certain she can deliver any meaningful support? Tyrion answered, his voice low. She has enough influence to sway a portion of the Reach. Their farmland is crucial. Starving Daenerys of supplies might be our greatest advantage if it comes to open conflict. For now, Malera will mask her intentions, pretend loyalty, while quietly undermining Daenerys' rule. Sansa breathed out, a thoughtful hum. That could be a strong piece in this game. But alliances built on secrecy are a delicate thing. If discovered, Daenerys will surely retaliate. That's so. Jon leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. I know, he said. But we have to gather what strength we can. If Daenerys turns her eyes north, we can't stand alone. This is only the beginning, Sansa. Tyrion is confident there are other lords who share our concerns. They're just waiting to see if anyone else is brave enough to resist. Sansa's cool gaze flicked to the flames dancing on the hearth. We must tread carefully, Jon. We can't risk exposing ourselves too soon. She paused, then looked back at them. What else did you learn on the road? Jon and Tyrion exchanged a glance. Tyrion shrugged slightly, leaving it to Jon to speak. Jon sighed. We heard rumors, though unconfirmed, that Daenerys has been reorganizing the city watch of King's Landing. Doubling their numbers, maybe. She's also tightening her hold on the lords who pledged to her after the war. Some are resentful, but fear the dragons too much to speak out. Sansa's brow creased with worry. Doubling the city watch suggests she expects unrest, or that she's preparing for something more. Do you think she intends to march north soon? They do him? Tyrion shook his head. Not immediately. She'll want to be certain her rear flank is secured, but rest assured, she's not forgotten Jon's refusal. Once she believes King's Landing is stable and the Stormlands pacified, she may decide it's time to punish the North for perceived disloyalty. A tense hush fell. The flames crackled, throwing warm light across their features. Finally, Sansa stood, clasping her hands together. We should gather the Northern Lords soon. Not to reveal our plans, but to remind them of the importance of readiness. I won't pretend it's a simple matter. Many will balk at even the suggestion of standing against a dragon queen. But we must be prepared for every possibility. Munduro? Jon rose as well, exhaustion creeping into his bones. Thank you. For now, let's keep the truth about the Tarly alliance limited to us, Arya and Bran. The fewer who know the details, the safer we'll be. Sansa inclined her head in agreement. Get some rest, both of you. We'll discuss more in the morning. Jon and Tyrion departed the hall, the weight of responsibility trailing after them like a long shadow. Tyrion made for the guest chambers he'd been assigned, while Jon ascended the familiar steps to his old room, where a brazier glowed with faint embers. Despite the chill in the stone walls, the space felt welcoming after days on the road. He shed his cloak, laid his sword gently on a table by the bed, and sat heavily on the edge of the mattress. The silence of the castle at night enveloped him, broken only by distant footsteps and the sigh of the winter wind outside the windows. Though he was tired, his mind roiled with thoughts of what might come next. He found himself recalling Daenerys' face, proud, determined, at the end, haunted by the weight of her own losses. He wondered if any part of her regretted the path she'd taken. It was too late for regrets now, he thought grimly. At last he closed his eyes and let the darkness claim him for a few hours, lulled by the faint warmth of the brazier and the echo of wind in the ramparts. Morning broke with a veil of gray clouds, threatening more snow. Jon donned a heavy tunic and furs, then left his room to find the great hall already stirring with renewed life. Northern lords who had come to pledge themselves, or at least show face, had gathered over a sparse breakfast. Dried meats, black bread, and hot cider were set out. Sansa stood at the table's head, speaking in hushed tones with several older men bearing the crests of lesser houses. She caught Jon's eye, giving him a small nod. He joined the gathering, exchanging greetings with those he recognized. Lord Glover, whose countenance was stiff but polite, and Lady Mormont, grown older now, still fierce in demeanor. A few other lords made their presence known, their conversation subdued. Perhaps they sensed a shift in the air. a feeling that something significant brewed behind Winterfell's walls. After breakfast, Sansa convened a meeting in the Solar. The lords arranged themselves around a long table. Arya emerged from a shadowed alcove, appearing so quietly that several men startled. She offered them a faint smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. Jon was glad to see his sister, but also wary. He knew how lethal she had become and wondered if she too plotted an angle in these uncertain times. Bran did not attend. Whether it was by choice or necessity, Jon wasn't certain. Sansa began by thanking the lords for coming on short notice. She spoke of renewed tensions in the south, of rumors that Daenerys might be consolidating power again. A hush settled as she addressed the possibility that the North might be called upon to provide men, should the Queen demand it. None missed the underlying tension in her voice, the suggestion that perhaps Winterfell would not be so quick to comply. Lord Serwyn cleared his throat. "Is the Queen not an ally to the North? She assisted us once before." His voice was uncertain, betraying a nervous flick of his eyes toward Jon. Jon met that gaze calmly. She was an ally against the threat of the White Walkers, but times have changed. She lost many of her closest advisors. We've had disagreements over the future of the North. All we're asking is that we remain vigilant. Let us not rush to bend to any demands without first considering our own well-being. Lady Mormont gave a curt nod. "We must always put the North first," she said, her voice carrying more steel than her small figure suggested. "If the Queen seeks to bring war to our gates, we'll meet her in kind." A few of the lords murmured agreement. Others seemed more cautious. Lord Glover folded his arms across his chest, brow furrowed. "The last war nearly destroyed us. Our lands are still mending. If Daenerys Targaryen demands fealty, do we have the means to stand against dragons?" Jon exchanged a glance with Sansa, then answered steadily, "We do what we must. I won't lie and say it would be easy. But we can't live under the threat of fire for the rest of our days." Tyrion, who had entered quietly and stood near the back, spoke up then, drawing startled looks. "Dragons are fearsome, yes, but they're not unstoppable. Their greatest power lies in instilling terror. If the realm unites in defiance, even dragons become vulnerable." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I only advise caution. Any direct confrontation would cost countless lives. We should make certain there is no peaceful resolution before we risk that." Arya's gray eyes flicked from Tyrion to Jon. She said nothing, but her stance suggested readiness for anything. Her hand rested near the hilt of her dagger, as though she half expected trouble to erupt even here. After an hour of back-and-forth discussion, Sansa concluded the meeting by urging each lord to reinforce their defenses discreetly, repair their walls, train more fighters, stockpile provisions. "I cannot say how events in the south will unfold," she said, her voice calm yet commanding. "But we must not be caught unprepared." The lords rose, some more convinced than others, but none openly defiant. They each bowed to Sansa, then to Jon, and filed out. The Solar cleared, leaving only the Starks, Tyrion, and a lingering silence. Sansa released a soft sigh. That went about as well as could be expected. Some were clearly uneasy at the thought of opposing Daenerys. Jon nodded. "We'll have to handle them carefully, keep them from panicking. If rumor spreads that we're forming a rebellion, Daenerys might find out sooner than we'd like." Arya, quiet until now, took a step closer. "You said you want to avoid bloodshed, but are you prepared if it comes to that?" She studied Jon with a searching intensity. He hesitated. "I pray we won't have to raise swords, but if Daenerys leaves us no choice, yes. I'd defend the North with my last breath." Her eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "You may need more than your last breath," she said, voice edged with something akin to grim humor. "I'll do whatever is necessary to protect our family." Tyrion watched the exchange, then cleared his throat. "Between Winterfell, Lady Tarly, and our other quiet connections, we might still negotiate a settlement that spares us a full-blown war. I would rather try 1,000 times to find compromise than see thousands die." Arya's face remained impassive, but she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Compromise," she repeated softly, as though testing the word. Let's hope the Dragon Queen still has ears to hear it. With that, she slid from the room as silently as she'd arrived. Sansa lingered a moment, exchanging a look with Jon, before murmuring that she would see to matters of supply. Jon nodded and watched her go, then turned to Tyrion, who remained. "Do you truly believe in a peaceful resolution?" Jon asked quietly. Tyrion licked his lips, considering. "I have to hope it's possible. I remember glimpses of a gentler Daenerys, the one who freed slaves in Essos, who wanted to break the chains of the oppressed. She may not be entirely gone, just buried under distrust and heartbreak." He paused, meeting Jon's gaze. Though sometimes, the lines between hero and tyrant blur more easily than we like. Jon stared at the floor, the worn stone beneath his boots. "I never wanted any of this. When I bent the knee to her once, I genuinely believed she was our best hope. But I've seen too much to trust her blindly now." Tyrion rested a hand briefly on Jon's arm. "We do what we must. Perhaps fate will surprise us." Over the following days, Winterfell's routine took on a nervous edge. Blacksmiths hammered more weapons than usual, albeit under the cover of forging new tools for farm work. Guards drilled in the courtyard, training with extra vigor. Silent glances were exchanged in corridors, as though everyone sensed a storm brewing. Yet for all the subtle preparations, life had to go on. Cooks prepared meals, tailors mended clothes, stewards counted stores. Snow fell intermittently, dusting the roofs and walls. Jon spent hours riding out to nearby settlements, meeting with their headmen in private. He spoke of the need for readiness, though he framed it as precaution against roving bandits or southern raiders. He left unspoken the deeper reason, not wanting to sow alarm. When he returned late in the evenings, cold and weary, he found comfort in the warmth of the castle and the presence of family, brief though their interactions might be. One night, as he crossed the darkened courtyard, he spotted Arya perched on a low wall, nearly invisible in the gloom. She seemed to be watching the guard rotations, studying the pattern of torchlight. He paused, calling softly, "Arya." She turned her head, her features half lit by the glow of a distant brazier. "Couldn't sleep," she said, her tone flat. "Too many thoughts." Jon approached, resting a hand on the stone beside her. "I know the feeling." He looked up at the sky, where a waning moon glimmered through wispy clouds. "I wanted to thank you for staying close, for helping keep watch. Sansa and I rely on you more than you know." Arya's lips curved into the faintest smile. "I'm not sure how much I help, but I do what I can." She let the silence stretch a moment. "I've seen how you look when Daenerys' name comes up. A part of you is still torn." Jon bit the inside of his cheek. "I cared for her. A long time ago, it feels like now. But I can't let that blind me." Arya gave a small nod. "Good. Love is dangerous when it clouds judgment." He exhaled, though a hint of sorrow flickered across his eyes. "You sound like father." Arya's smile vanished. "Father's gone, but I learned enough from him to know how to judge right and wrong. Just be careful, Jon. If you hesitate in the moment of decision, it might cost all of us." "Nay, then now." He glanced at her, seeing not the little girl he once knew, but a woman sharpened by loss and training. Someone who carried her own set of ghosts. "I won't fail the North," he promised. She nodded, turning her gaze back to the patrolling guards. The conversation ended there, yet it lingered in Jon's mind long after he left her. In another corner of Winterfell, Tyrion busied himself with letters, some coded in subtle ways, so that even if intercepted, they'd reveal little. He conversed frequently with Maester Wolkan, double-checking certain genealogies or researching the histories of Targaryen dragons. Anything that might give them an edge. Late at night, Tyrion sometimes sat in the library, a single candle illuminating pages of old texts. If the quiet unsettled him, he didn't show it. But once a servant passing by heard him muttering under his breath about all the battles in Westeros, past that could have been avoided with a bit of reason. Thus time passed in a tense equilibrium, winter's long nights weighing on every heart. No ravens came from King's Landing bearing declarations of war, yet none arrived bearing offers of peace either. Each day that drifted by without news felt like the slow tightening of a noose, as though Daenerys might be mustering a blow that would land before they could brace themselves. Then, one cold dawn, a rider appeared at Winterfell's gates, wrapped in a mud-spattered cloak. He carried a sealed letter from the Eyrie, addressed to Jon Snow. Admitted into the courtyard by suspicious guards, the messenger dismounted with stiff limbs and presented the missive to the first official he saw. Word reached Jon swiftly, who hurried out to meet this new arrival. Tyrion joined him, and together they received the messenger in a small side chamber near the main hall. The man, shivering, gulped down hot ale as soon as it was offered. His eyes darted nervously around the room. Jon recognized him as one of Lord Royce's subordinates, a lean fellow who once accompanied the Lord on a visit. "Your letter," he said, breath uneven. "Lord Royce said it was urgent, my lord. He warned me not to rest until it was delivered." Jon broke the seal and scanned the writing. Tyrion watched his face, noting how Jon's features tightened. "Bad news?" Tyrion asked quietly. Jon lowered the parchment with a grim nod. "Lord Royce writes that Daenerys has dispatched envoys throughout the Vale, demanding renewed oaths of fealty. She's apparently aware that some houses might waver in their loyalty. He says the envoys are to return to King's Landing in less than a fortnight with assurances, signatures on parchments, sealed by each lord. If any refuse, Daenerys has promised to visit in person." Tyrion frowned. If that's the tone of her letters, then she's moving closer to open coercion. The Vale is crucial ground, rich in resources, strategically placed. She wants to ensure it's locked under her rule before she turns her attention elsewhere. Jon's grip on the parchment tightened. Royce suspects that if the Vale kneels without resistance, the North will be next. He's urging us to stand by him if he refuses to sign. Tyrion exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "And if we encourage him to refuse, it could spark war sooner than we planned." Jon handed the parchment to Tyrion, who read the lines carefully. The messenger looked anxious, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Tyrion offered him a thin smile, urging him to warm himself by the fire. Jon took a step back, folding his arms. "We have to give Lord Royce an answer," Jon murmured. "He's risked sending this letter to warn us." Tyrion set the parchment aside. "If Royce refuses Daenerys' envoys, she might march on the Eyrie. Or at the very least, she'll send a smaller force to bring them to heel. That could be the spark that ignites everything." "My eyes." Jon rubbed his temples. "We can't force him to sign. If we let him capitulate, we lose a potential ally. If we push him to resist and the Eyrie falls quickly, that sets a terrible precedent. Other lords might think it hopeless to resist her." Tyrion gave a small nod. "Better to secure more allies first, but time is short." He turned to the messenger. "How long before Daenerys' envoys reach the Eyrie?" The man swallowed. "Within days, my lord. They were already passing the bloody gate when I departed." "Then?" Jon paced across the chamber, boots scraping the stone floor. At last, he spoke in a clipped tone, as though making up his mind. "We need to send word to Royce not to refuse outright. Stall for time. Tell him to feign willingness to sign but insist on extra conditions. Maybe say he must consult with other lords in the Vale, something that buys him a few weeks. Meanwhile, we'll see if we can muster enough pressure from the Tarly side, and possibly other southern houses, to force Daenerys to slow her hand." "Now," Tyrion tapped his chin, considering. "Yes. Ask Royce to pretend he's open to negotiations, so Daenerys doesn't descend on him immediately. The more she believes the Vale is only hesitating out of courtesy or internal politics, the less likely she is to use violence right away." Jon paused, glancing at the messenger. "You'll carry this reply to Lord Royce?" The man nodded hastily. "Yes, my lord." "Then rest a night here, change horses, and be on your way." Jon signaled to one of the nearby guards, who approached. "See to it he has a warm bed and hot food." The guard led the messenger out, leaving Jon and Tyrion alone in the chamber. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Jon stared down at his hands, knuckles whitening. "She's moving faster than we anticipated." Tyrion's face was drawn with worry. "Yes. She's consolidating. If we cannot gather enough lords to stand united against intimidation, the North will be isolated. And if war comes before we're ready..." Jon's mind swirled with the possibilities. Bloodshed, burning fields, Winterfell under siege. "We must accelerate our plans," he said firmly. "We'll send word to Lady Melara that Daenerys may soon move on the Vale. She'll need to do her part, encourage the Lords of the Reach to either stall or quietly align with us. If Daenerys can't trust her supply lines from the south, she might think twice about marching on the Eyrie." Tyrion allowed himself the faintest glimmer of optimism. Cut off her resources, sow uncertainty among her allies. Yes, that could work. It's a dangerous gambit. If she finds out the North is orchestrating this, she'll retaliate with fury. Jon's jaw tightened. "We've chosen our course. Daenerys is determined to hold the entire realm in her grip. We either bow or stand. I want bow." Tyrion's eyes flickered with something like admiration and dread mingled together. "I suspect it will take all our wit, all our resolve, to emerge from this. But so be it." They parted ways, each hurrying to set in motion the next steps of their intricate defiance. Jon went to Sansa, explaining the letter's contents and the need for a swift reply. She prepared the words with her usual meticulous care, ensuring Lord Royce understood how to camouflage resistance. Meanwhile, Tyrion retired to his desk, quill scratching across parchment as he composed carefully veiled instructions for Lady Melara and others whose loyalty might be swayed. Word spread discreetly among the higher echelons of Winterfell's leadership. Daenerys was making demands on the Vale, and the North must be ready. Soldiers were quietly repositioned along roads leading to Winterfell, ensuring they could react if any unexpected southern force appeared. Arya vanished for stretches of time, gathering whispers around the castle, returning only to pass on cryptic bits of intelligence about travelers in the region. The tension thickened like a frozen river about to crack under the strain of ice. Days later, another raven arrived, this one from the Riverlands. Though it lacked an identifying seal, Tyrion immediately recognized the subtle code phrases within. It was from an old contact in the city of Riverrun. The letter warned that the Targaryen envoys were not only in the Vale, but also heading west, seeking to shore up loyalty among the Lords of the Trident. The net was widening. Jon read the missive, feeling each word like a tightening vice. He and Tyrion conferred with Sansa once more. Voices hushed in a corner of the great library. Shelves packed with ancient tomes loomed over them, silent witnesses to a realm in flux. Sansa tapped her fingers on the edge of a dusty volume, her cool eyes flicking between Jon and Tyrion. "If Daenerys secures the Vale and the Riverlands, the North will be completely surrounded," she said in a low voice. "Even if House Tarly stands with us, we'll be cut off. I'm not sure how long we can hold out if that happens." Jon's fists clenched. "We can't let it come to that. We have to move faster, get more lords to question her rule. The only way she'll hold back the dragons is if she's uncertain whether she can maintain control. Fear cuts both ways." Tyrion nodded. "Agreed. If enough houses show hesitation or covert hostility, Daenerys risks rebellion breaking out in multiple regions at once. She won't want to fight on multiple fronts. She might opt for negotiation, at least for a time." "Nabikamain." Sansa studied them both. "I'll do my part to keep the Northern Lords resolved. We'll stay on the lookout for any movement by her forces." She paused, glancing at Jon. "And if that movement comes, if the dragons darken our skies..." Jon held her gaze. "Then we'll face them. But maybe, with luck, we can avoid that final step." She nodded reluctantly, and the conversation ended. Yet none of them departed with a sense of true reassurance. The wheels were in motion. The realm seemed to hold its breath. In the weeks that followed, reports trickled in that envoys from the Dragon Queen were systematically pressuring various houses in the Vale and along the Trident. Some lords caved quickly, eager to avoid trouble. Others stalled, feigning ignorance or preoccupation. A few outright refused, which only escalated tensions. Rumors spread that Daenerys' outriders had torched a small keep whose lord dared to mock her demands. Though unconfirmed, such stories fueled more fear. Amid this gathering storm, Jon found himself haunted by sleepless nights. He patrolled Winterfell's battlements in the late hours, peering into the darkness as though expecting to see dragons silhouetted against the moon. The memory of war, of the slaughter and strife he'd endured, lingered like a scar that refused to fully heal. Some nights he thought of Daenerys' touch, her whispered words of alliance and trust before everything shattered. He wondered if she replayed their final conversation in her mind, or if she was too busy forging her new empire to care. And so the North braced itself, forging quiet alliances, sowing subtle seeds of doubt among Daenerys' would-be supporters. Tyrion wrote countless letters, weaving a tapestry of uncertain loyalties, meant to slow the Queen's momentum. Sansa tightened Winterfell's outer defenses, rationing supplies, ensuring they could withstand a siege if it came. Arya drifted like a wraith through it all, occasionally sharing tidbits of intelligence gleaned from travelers, or eavesdropped discussions in the local taverns. Despite all these efforts, a sense of inevitability crept in. With every passing day, Daenerys' moves became bolder. Some lords capitulated, some resisted, but no region was left untouched by her demand for fealty. Little by little, her claim stretched its shadow across the map, and though the North was not yet compelled to bend, the encroachment felt like the slow collapse of a wall around them. Tyrion, one evening, stood upon a parapet with Jon, gazing out at the snow-laden expanse beyond Winterfell. Torches flickered below, illuminating drifting snowflakes. The hush of winter's night wrapped them in a bitter cold. Tyrion spoke softly, voice nearly lost in the wind. "I fear this game will soon reach a tipping point. We'll either bring Daenerys to the negotiating table, or we'll be forced into outright conflict. She's too shrewd to let half the realm slip from her grasp without reaction." Jon's breath lingered in the frigid air. "You're right. One way or another, the moment will come." He closed his eyes, letting the cold sting his cheeks. "We have to be ready." And so they waited, carrying on their dangerous dance, each move a step that might bring them closer to ruin or salvation. In Winterfell's hidden corridors and quiet rooms, letters changed hands, whispered conversations laid plans, and the future of the North hung by a thread. Outside, winter continued its slow march, blanketing the land in white. The nights stretched longer, as though even time itself felt the weight of the approaching crisis. Jon stood at his window late that night, gazing at the star-pierced sky, listening to the rustle of wind against the stone. Somewhere out there, Daenerys prepared for a reckoning, certain of her right to rule. He thought of her dragons, black silhouettes against a burning horizon, and hoped that the tenuous alliances he and Tyrion had formed would be enough to keep the North free of that flame. But in his heart, he knew the final confrontation was only a matter of time. Shadows grew longer with each day, and destinies long foretold drew nearer to their fulfillment. The North held its breath, bracing for the storm to break. And still, in the quiet halls of Winterfell, Jon Snow stood resolute, refusing to bend, prepared to do whatever it might take to protect those he loved from the dragon's wrath. The wind that night carried with it a biting cold, sifting across Winterfell's walls and through its narrow corridors. A thin layer of snow had fallen just before dusk, dusting the courtyard in pale powder. Jon stood alone near the old well, a lantern in his hand, throwing trembling shapes on the stones at his feet. The hush that settled over the keep was broken only by the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Someone still working at the forge, a silhouette framed by the faint glow of embers. Jon let out a slow breath, watching it dissipate in the air. He could sense unease in every corner of Winterfell, from the anxious glances of servants to the grim focus of the men patrolling the battlements. Rumors reached them daily of Daenerys' continued push, of envoys twisting arms from the Riverlands to the Vale. Though no official summons had yet come for the North, it felt like a mere matter of time. He turned at the echo of quiet footsteps. Arya came into view, walking with that silent grace he could never quite grow accustomed to. Even in the flickering light, he could see the tautness in her face, a reflection of the tension that gripped them all. "I thought you might be here," she said softly, stopping a few paces away. She wore a practical cloak and carried her blade sheathed at her hip. "Have you heard anything new?" "Not since the last Raven," Jon said, voice low. "Lord Royce continues to stall, but the Targaryen envoys are pressing him harder. If he doesn't sign soon, Daenerys might well send a detachment to the Bloody Gate." Arya glanced toward the ramparts where guards walked their routes. Her features were unreadable for a moment. Every day she waits we get stronger. But so does she. It won't be long before something breaks. Jon knew she spoke truly. The alliances they'd worked so hard to form were a fragile net, meant to slow Daenerys' progress, to surround her with enough uncertainty that she might pause. Yet he also felt the precariousness of this plot, each thread risking discovery at any moment. One false step could see Winterfell burnt to the ground by dragonfire. Arya moved closer. He could sense the concern in her posture. "You're doing the right thing," she said, as though hearing the unspoken doubts that churned in his head. "If we remain silent and let her establish complete control, we'll end up bending the knee eventually, or dying when we refuse." He gave a slight nod. "I know. He paused, searching for the right words. "There was a time I believed in her cause. She was different then. Or maybe I was just too hopeful." Arya rested a hand on his shoulder, briefly. "We can't dwell on that now. We have people who depend on us. Sansa, the Lords of the North, all those who can't defend themselves if dragons come calling." "Nay." Jon managed a faint, rueful smile. Always the pragmatist. He squeezed her hand gently, then drew back. "Come on. Let's get inside before we freeze." They headed toward the keep, their lantern illuminating a small pool of light across the frosted ground. As they entered the dim corridor, the warmth of the interior enveloped them, thanks to hearths kept blazing in nearly every room. Servants bustled quietly. Respectful nods given to Jon and Arya as they passed. They reached the great hall to find Tyrion and Sansa seated near the massive fireplace, leaning over a large map of the realm. The rest of the cavernous space was mostly empty, the tables cleared after the evening meal. Sansa looked up, beckoning them closer. "We've just received another raven," Sansa said, her voice containing a measured calm. "From one of Lady Malara's contacts in the Reach. More houses there are covertly refusing to supply Daenerys' forces. It appears they're dragging their feet when it comes to shipments of grain." "Nadnsma." Tyrion traced a slender finger along the map, touching the area denoting the Reach. "If enough of them coordinate, the Queen's food stores could become an issue by the end of winter. The subtlety is key. They can't make it obvious that they're cutting her off. But small delays, missing shipments, claims of poor harvest. It may accumulate." Arya joined them, standing beside Sansa Kai. "That might slow her forces, but it won't stop the dragons if she decides to fly north anyway." "No," Tyrion agreed. "But it might force her to focus southward first. She won't risk her army starving come spring. If her supply lines weaken, she'll have to divert attention to reassert control. Buy or seize grain where she can find it." Jon studied the map. Each region was marked with small tokens representing loyalties. Most still hovered in uneasy neutrality or partial submission to Daenerys. But Tyrion had inserted tokens in the Vale, the Reach, and near the Riverlands, places where discontent brewed. Jon felt a grim satisfaction seeing those small pieces, knowing they were the result of his and Tyrion's efforts. But the southern coastline, Blackwater Bay, the Stormlands, the Crownlands, remained firmly under the Targaryen banner. King's Landing's token was especially large, reflecting the Queen's seat of power. "How long do you think we have?" He asked no one in particular. Tyrion sighed, steepling his fingers under his chin. "It's hard to say. She's forced half the Vale's lords to sign her documents, though apparently with several reluctant additions. The other half is either resisting or feigning illness or absence. If she completes her show of authority there, she may turn her gaze north as soon as the roads allow. Winter could slow her ground troops, but not her dragons. They're the real threat." "Nandamans." Sansa stared into the flames, silent for a moment. "We must be ready for the worst. We can't assume she'll wait for spring to move against us. She might believe a winter attack gives her dragons a greater advantage." Jon exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Then we should finish reinforcing the walls. The masons have been working day and night, but let's see if they can speed the repairs. We'll need more scorpions as well, if only to show we won't be an easy target from the skies." "Den best." Tyrion's lips curled at the mention of scorpions. The large mounted crossbows once used in King's Landing to wound dragons. The Scorpions have never proven entirely reliable, he mused. But they're better than nothing. A few well-placed bolts can make even a dragon hesitate. Sansa rose from her seat, smoothing the folds of her cloak. I'll speak with the blacksmiths and carpenters. We'll have to be creative with resources, but we'll manage. Arya glanced at the map, then looked at Jon. What about more alliances? Dorne is far, but they might resent Targaryen rule after everything that's happened, or even the Ironborn. What remains of them might not want to kneel. Tyrion's expression grew thoughtful. Dorne is an enigma. Their ruling family was nearly wiped out. They've endured so many shifts of power. It's hard to say who holds the strings there now. As for the Iron Islands, Yara Greyjoy once pledged to Daenerys. If she still supports the Queen, that route is closed to us. Destiny. Jon tapped a finger on the table's edge, mind working. We can try sending discreet feelers to Dorne at least. If there's any faction that wants independence, they might be open to a pact. The desert climate means winter doesn't grip them as it does us, so they could have the resources we need. Tyrion inclined his head. I'll pen something tonight. We'll need an emissary the Dornish trust, or at least someone who can make the approach without raising suspicion. But first, let's finalize our plans here. The last thing we need is to spread ourselves too thin. Nice. They agreed on the next steps. Strengthening Winterfell's fortifications, urging the smaller northern houses to stay alert, and continuing to feed misinformation to Daenerys agents where possible. The group then dissolved, each heading to a different task. The night wore on, with the occasional swirl of snow drifting past the tall windows. Jon eventually left the hall, heart weighed down by the scope of everything they faced. In a shadowed corridor, he ran to Maester Walken, who clutched several scrolls in his arms. The Maester dipped his head in greeting. "My lord," he said, voice echoing slightly off the stone walls. "I've compiled the recent messages from White Harbor and the Dreadfort, as requested." Jon motioned for him to follow. They walked together to a small room near the library, where a solitary lamp hung from a chain, casting a pool of yellow light on a heavy wooden desk. Jon closed the door behind them, gesturing for Walken to lay the scrolls down. "What news?" Jon asked, removing his gloves and flexing his cold, stiffened fingers. Maester Walken adjusted his spectacles. "From White Harbor, Lord Manderley acknowledges the increased threat from Daenerys envoys. He states he's strengthened his city guard and is prepared to send men if you call for them. The Dreadfort's new ruling family, after the Boltons, are more cautious. They claim loyalty to Winterfell but urge no rash action." Jon nodded. "Typical. They don't want to be seen openly defying a dragon. But they don't want to ignore us either." He rubbed his jaw, feeling the faint stubble. "Tell them we only ask they remain vigilant. That might be enough for now." "Matter what?" Walken nodded, making a note on a scrap of parchment. "There's also a letter from House Reed in the Neck. They report an unusual influx of travelers heading north, though they can't confirm they're all Targaryen spies. Could be just merchants or wanderers seeking refuge from the southern power struggles." Jon frowned. "Or Daenerys could be sending scouts disguised as travelers. The Neck is a vital passage. If the Reeds see anything suspicious, they should warn us immediately." Walken jotted that down as well. "I'll dispatch a raven tonight with your instructions." Jon thanked him, then dismissed him to his duties. Alone in the small room, he looked at the scrolls piled on the table. The dance of subterfuge and alliances was intricate, draining, and endless. Some days, he longed for the simple life he once led as a brother of the Night's Watch, though he knew he could never return to that ignorance. Too much had changed. He had changed. He left the documents where they lay, deciding that a breath of fresh air might clear his thoughts. Stepping outside into a courtyard illuminated by moonlight, he inhaled the crisp northern wind. Guards patrolled the walls, their silhouettes stark against the muted glow. He passed a cluster of training dummies, battered by weeks of sword practice. The quiet felt eerie yet comforting. Winterfell was never truly silent, but at this hour, the hustle was subdued, a collective hush before dawn approached. His thoughts wandered to the time he refused Daenerys, how her eyes had flashed with disbelief, and, beneath it, a flicker of hurt. She had not expected that from him. He wondered if the seeds of hostility had truly been sown there, or if she would have turned on the north eventually. It mattered little now, but the question haunted him. Morning arrived clothed in clouds, the sun a pale disk struggling to break through. The day's tasks began early. Workers hammered wooden frames for additional scorpions, guards trained with longbows, and Sansa oversaw the distribution of winter stores. Jon convened with Tyrion and a handful of northern advisors to discuss possible infiltration routes for Daenerys spies. They debated sending outriders to patrol the main roads, though the cold made such endeavors dangerous. As they planned, a horn sounded from the gates, low and echoing. One blast meant an approaching rider. Jon exchanged a glance with Tyrion and strode out of the hall, cloak billowing around him. By the time he reached the courtyard, the massive gates were partway open, letting a swirl of snow drift in. A lone horseman urged his mount forward, a messenger by the look of his tattered cloak, the beast panting from hard riding. Jon raised a hand to calm the stable boys who rushed to assist. The rider slid from the saddle, unsteady on his feet, and bowed hastily. "A letter, my lord," he panted, breath misting. "From the Vale." Jon felt his heart thud. He took the sealed parchment, noticing the imprint of House Royce's sigil in the wax. He dismissed the messenger to get warm food and rest, then broke the seal on the spot. Around him, the courtyard hushed, a sense of anticipation thick in the air. He scanned the words, eyes narrowing. Tyrion stepped closer, but Jon finished reading before speaking quietly. "Lord Royce has refused the Targaryen envoys." He tried stalling, but they demanded immediate signatures. He had no choice but to show his defiance. "Name." Tyrion's face turned grave. "That means she'll likely retaliate." "Has she responded yet?" Jon shook his head, tapping the parchment. "Royce writes that the envoys left in fury, threatening to bring the Queen's wrath upon the Vale. We can assume she'll dispatch either troops or dragons, or both." A handful of guards exchanged worried glances. Tyrion touched Jon's arm lightly, guiding him away from curious ears. "If Daenerys attacks the Eyrie, can we afford to send help? It might force her hand early, but if we leave Royce to stand alone, the Vale could fall." Jon's jaw tightened. "We swore we'd aid each other, but the Eyrie is difficult to reach in winter, and the roads are perilous. Even if we march, we might not get there in time to do anything but join the slaughter." Tyrion nodded, lips pressed in a thin line. A siege on the Eyrie would be complicated, even for dragons, given the mountainous terrain. But with air power, it's still a real threat. Perhaps Royce can hold out long enough for us to intervene, if we choose to do so openly. Now wait and row. Jon could sense the weight of that decision. An open intervention would mean throwing the North's hand onto the table, revealing all their alliances for Daenerys to see. It would mean war. Was the North truly ready for that? Steadying himself, he motioned for Tyrion to follow and headed back inside, summoning Sansa and several of the key advisors. Once in a private chamber, they relayed the message. Sansa's face paled slightly. She ran a hand over the table's surface, as though trying to ground herself. If Daenerys moves on the Vale, the North might be next. Still, sending an army through those mountain passes in winter. She trailed off, looking at Jon for guidance. He inhaled. "We could dispatch a modest force to reinforce the Bloody Gate. Not a full-scale march, but a detachment that shows we stand with Royce if it comes to a fight. If Daenerys attacks, we can't let the Vale be destroyed. We need them." One of the advisors, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Lord Banyan, cleared his throat. "Even a modest force will struggle in those mountains. And if the Dragon Queen herself comes with her beasts, no walls or gate might withstand her. This is a dire gamble." Jon nodded, acknowledging the risk. "We knew this day would come. Royce has taken a stand. If we do nothing, we lose a powerful ally and send a signal of weakness to the realm. If we act, we risk drawing Daenerys' wrath upon us before we're fully prepared." Tyrion looked at Sansa, then back to Jon. "No choice is safe here, but perhaps if we send a contingent, it will strengthen Royce's position enough that Daenerys balks at a direct confrontation, fearing a wider conflict." "Daenerys?" Sansa pressed her lips together, then gave a brisk nod. We must try, otherwise, everything we've built so far unravels. They agreed on a plan. Dispatch a small but skilled force under a capable commander, someone who understood the Vale's terrain. Jon would remain in Winterfell, as his presence was vital to hold the North together and coordinate from the rear. They chose Sir Declan, a veteran knight from the wars against the dead. He was known for his strategic mind and calm under pressure. Within hours, they assembled about 200 men, mostly archers and light cavalry, the latter of which would guide the foot soldiers through the passes. They departed quietly under the cover of dusk, blending their banners with plain cloth, hoping not to attract unwanted attention on the roads. The next day, a bitter wind swept through Winterfell, forcing many to remain indoors. Jon paced in the solar, waiting for any sign that Daenerys had responded. Tyrion pored over maps once again, searching for vantage points near the Eyrie where their contingent might give support. Sansa oversaw the forging of more scorpion bolts. Arya vanished, presumably hunting for new tidbits of intelligence among the travelers in the surrounding area. As twilight thickened, a raven arrived from the west. Though its message pertained to more than the Vale, Lady Melara Tarly had written in coded language. Rumors suggested Daenerys was massing a small force near King's Landing, possibly preparing to march out. The specifics were unclear, but combined with the envoy fiasco in the Vale, it seemed to confirm their worst fear, that the Queen was turning her gaze outward, ready to strike down resistance. Tyrion read the coded words and set the parchment aside with a weary grimace. "It begins," he said simply. "Or it will soon." Jon's chest felt tight. They had expected this, fought to delay it. But now that events were escalating, the reality struck like a hammer. We can still hope her first move is against the Vale, not the North. If Royce can hold her off, or if she decides to subdue the Riverlands first. Sansa sat near the hearth where the flames threw dancing shadows across her face. "Hope," she repeated quietly, gaze distant. "Hope won't shield us from dragonfire if she rides north. We must steel ourselves for the possibility that we stand at the brink of war." A day passed, then another, each moment filled with tension. Wolves were heard howling at night, their eerie cries weaving with the wind. Jon stood on the battlements, gazing at the southern skies, half expecting to see a dark shape winging through the clouds. The guards below spoke in hushed tones, their eyes too flicking upward now and then. Finally, in the late afternoon of the third day, another messenger arrived, this time bearing news from the Vale itself. The man was exhausted, clad in mud-spattered leathers. Jon, Tyrion, and Sansa received him in the great hall. The messenger bowed low, his voice hoarse as he delivered Royce's urgent words. Targaryen forces had been sighted approaching the base of the mountains, leading to the Bloody Gate. Some carried banners of the Unsullied, others bore the standard of the Crownlands. No dragon spotted yet, but the rumor was that one had been seen circling near the coast. Jon's pulse hammered. He exchanged a look with Tyrion, who looked pale. Sansa spoke first. "Do they ask for parley?" The messenger shook his head. "None so far, my lady. They come as an army. Lord Royce says they'll reach the gate in a matter of days, unless the snow slow them. Your own men arrived, bolstering our defenses, but were sorely outnumbered." Jon clenched his jaw. "Then we pray the mountains and the cold will work to our advantage. The Eyrie was built to repel large armies. If they can't bring a dragon in close, they might be forced into a siege. That could buy us time." Tyrion's gaze flickered with an old strategist's light. "The Bloody Gate is a choke point. Their numbers mean less if they can't breach it swiftly. But if a dragon arrives..." He didn't finish the thought. Everyone understood what that would mean. The tension in the hall was palpable. Sansa dismissed the messenger to rest, then looked to Jon. "We must decide if we'll send more men, or if we'll wait and see if Daenerys commits her dragon. If she does, all the men in the world might not matter." Jon turned away, pacing a short distance, hands clasped behind his back. The notion of letting Royce stand alone nagged at him, but committing too many forces could leave Winterfell vulnerable. "We've done what we can for now," he said quietly, though the words tasted bitter. If we empty Winterfell, and Daenerys decides to fly here instead, we'll have lost everything." Arya's voice came from behind them. She had slipped in so quietly none had noticed. "So we wait, and keep an ear to every whisper. If the dragon shows, we might be forced to respond in some way, try to distract her, or lure her away." Jon nodded grimly, not surprised that Arya had gleaned so much. "We wait," he echoed. "It's a cruel thing, but we have little choice." He knew, in that moment, that each day that passed might bring a raven with news of victory or devastation. In the meantime, life in Winterfell continued in a taut hush. Preparations continued, weapons were readied, everyone braced as though for a blizzard that might bury them in an instant. That night, Jon found it impossible to rest. He roamed the corridors, pausing by windows where torches lit the bailey below. Servants and guards bustled about, exchanging anxious murmurs. In the library, Tyrion was awake, flipping through a book about Targaryen sieges in ages past. Jon joined him at the table, where a single candle cast elongated shadows over the pages. "You should sleep," Tyrion said, not looking up. "Exhaustion dulls the mind, and we need your wits sharp." Jon settled into a chair. "I can't. Too many thoughts. Too many memories of what war is like." Tyrion closed the book. "I've seen a fair share of battles myself. None are easy, but facing dragons is a nightmare few can imagine. If only we could reason with her, remind her of the suffering she once vowed to end. But I fear that part of her is overshadowed by the desire to rule." "Hey." Jon pressed his lips together. "When I first met her, she spoke passionately about breaking the wheel, ending tyranny. Now I wonder if the wheel just spins anew." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the faint crackle of the candle's flame. Tyrion took a measured breath. "I hold on to a shred of hope that if she's forced to the table, forced to negotiate rather than conquer, she might remember those ideals. But I won't stake the North's fate on it." Jon nodded. "Nor will I." He rose, bidding Tyrion a good night. Though he doubted any true rest would find him, he retreated to his chamber to at least lie down, staring at the ceiling for what felt like hours before slipping into a shallow sleep. Dawn broke, bleak and cold, with swirling gray skies. The next 2 days crawled by without fresh word from the Vale. The quiet was almost worse than a flurry of bad news, for it let the imagination run wild. Had Daenerys' army broken through? Was the Vale now aflame? Or had snows trapped her forces in the lower passes? On the afternoon of the third day, a horn sounded again from the gates, sending a ripple of anticipation through the courtyard. Jon hurried down, Tyrion at his side. There, a raven handler approached, carrying a small scroll. The man's cheeks were flushed from the chill air. "It's from Sir Declan, my lord," the handler said, handing it over. Jon's hands shook slightly as he unrolled the parchment. He read quickly, feeling Tyrion's gaze on him. When he looked up, he released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "They haven't attacked yet," Jon announced, voice tight but relieved. Daenerys soldiers encamped near the base of the mountains, apparently constructing siege equipment or waiting for supplies. The Vale's weather is punishing them. There has been a heavy snowfall. Some of their supply wagons are stuck on the lower roads. Tyrion gave a slight, grim smile. "Winter might do more to defend the Eyrie than any of us. That's good news, at least. It gives Royce and our men time to strengthen their defenses." Jon nodded, though he didn't allow himself too much relief. "Declan says morale is decent, but they know once the weather breaks, an assault may come. And if Daenerys has a dragon hidden away, just waiting for clear skies, that might be the real threat." Tyrion looked thoughtful, scanning the message again. "If she's forced to hold her position and wait out the snow, we have an opportunity to further sabotage her supply lines from the south. Maybe Lady Melara can intensify the disruptions." Jon's heart pounded at the thought. The cunning side of him knew this was their chance to push Daenerys into a corner where she had to negotiate. Write to Melara at once. Tell her to escalate the delays to ensure the Targaryen army at the Vale remains cold and hungry. If Daenerys sees her forces faltering, she might rethink launching a war midwinter. They rushed to the library, where Tyrion composed the letter with practiced precision, using the code they'd established. Maester Walken would send it at once. Jon hovered nearby, thinking of the men who faced possible battle in the mountain passes. He prayed the storms would continue to hamper Daenerys' army, prayed that no monstrous winged shape emerged from the southern skies. In the days that followed, a series of smaller ravens arrived from the Vale, each describing the same stalemate. Daenerys' forces lingered, occasionally testing the lower defenses, but not launching a full-scale attack. Some minor skirmishes occurred, raiding parties searching for easier routes, but the Vale's defenders beat them back. Sir Declan reported a few injuries, nothing catastrophic. Still, the tension pressed down like a leaden cloak. One letter mentioned the distant roar of something overhead at night, a shape flying beyond the mountains. But the dragon did not strike, as though biding its time. While this uneasy standoff lasted in the Vale, Winterfell rushed to finalize every last aspect of its defenses. Walls were inspected daily, scorpions tested and set on rotating turrets. Sansa organized the townsfolk outside the gates to ensure they had places to shelter if the worst happened. Arya continued her silent observations, intercepting rumors of southern spies. Tyrion maintained a flurry of correspondence with Lady Melara and a handful of other covert allies. Each letter was a stitch in the larger tapestry, a plan to starve or deter the Targaryen war machine. Yet even as they worked, all knew that this precarious balance might collapse with a single decisive move from Daenerys. If the dragon soared into the Vale and reduced the Bloody Gate to rubble, the path north would open like a wound. The nightmares of the men stationed there crept into every thought. Jon found himself startled awake more than once, plagued by images of unstoppable fire raining down. Amid the heightened vigilance, the bonds among the people of Winterfell grew subtly stronger. Men who once harbored quiet doubts about Jon's leadership, perhaps resentful that he'd turned away the Dragon Queen, found renewed respect for him as they witnessed his tireless dedication. He made rounds each morning to the training yards, offering encouragement, sparring with recruits. He spoke personally with stable hands, blacksmiths, and stewards, ensuring they felt seen and valued. Over time, that sense of unity fortified Winterfell as much as its stone walls. Sansa, too, demonstrated the calm, measured leadership of a true lady of Winterfell. She addressed the household staff regularly, kept accounts of grain stores, and arranged for potential refugees from the mountain villages. Arya, for her part, was less visible in official capacities, but guards and servants alike whispered of her nightly watchfulness, her uncanny ability to appear anywhere announced. Tyrion's wry humor occasionally eased tensions at the evening meals, though it was often overshadowed by the knowledge that war loomed at the doorstep. On the 10th day since the Vale standoff began, another messenger galloped into Winterfell's courtyard under the dull sky of early morning. Jon was just returning from the stables, where he'd fed and brushed his stallion. He saw the gates open and the rider burst through, frost clinging to the man's cloak. An uneasy hush spread among the onlookers, everyone sensing that news from the south had finally arrived once more. Jon hurried forward, heart pounding. The messenger slid from the saddle, almost collapsing with fatigue. Jon caught him by the arm and helped him stand. "Easy," Jon murmured. "Speak when you can." The man struggled for breath. "A raven. From Lady Melara. Arrived at the holdfast where I was stationed. Urgent. Said the Targaryen supply caravans have begun to vanish en route to the Vale. She suspects bandits or sabotage or both. A major scandal. As the Queen's men, local lords." Jon's pulse raced. This was exactly the sabotage they'd hoped for, though hearing it confirmed was still shocking. "Is Lady Melara safe?" he asked, helping the man toward a bench near the gatehouse. "She says so for now," the messenger managed. "But rumors say Daenerys threatens to unleash her dragon if the supply lines aren't restored. Word is House Tarly is under suspicion. Some of the caravans were traveling near their lands." Jon exchanged a meaningful look with Tyrion, who had appeared behind him. This was the risk they knew Melara faced. "We'll send a response," Jon said firmly. "She must remain hidden behind plausible deniability. Let the Queen waste time hunting phantom bandits, while the Vale remains locked in stalemate." Neotormo, He guided the messenger to the care of a nearby steward, who would see to his immediate needs. Then, gesturing for Tyrion, Sansa, and Arya, who had just appeared from the side, to follow, he strode into the hall. Once they were safely within its thick walls, they conferred in hushed tones by the great hearth. Tyrion spoke first, running a hand over the stubble on his chin. If Daenerys truly believes House Tarly is behind these caravan raids, she'll be outraged. The Tarly name already stings her pride because of what happened with Randall and Dickon. This could push her to direct action in the Reach. Namadin. Sansa's eyes flickered with worry. That might relieve some pressure on the Vale, but it puts our allies at risk. If she attacks them, how long before she traces their ties to us? Arya remained silent for a time, then said softly, "Is it possible for Lady Melara to redirect suspicion? Let someone else take the blame. Even bandits need a figurehead. The more confusion Daenerys has, the less certain she'll be of who her real enemies are." Tyrion nodded slowly, as though a germ of an idea was forming. "Perhaps I can craft a letter suggesting other outlaws in the region. A rogue element from the Stormlands or the remnants of the Golden Company left behind. Something plausible enough that Daenerys' agents might chase shadows for a while." Jon ran his hand through his hair, exhaling. "That's worth trying. Every day she's distracted is a day the Vale can hold. But we also need to be prepared if Daenerys changes course and decides to bring her fury north instead." Mem. They stood there, the four of them, each weighed by the enormity of the game they played. The hall felt colder than usual, despite the blazing fire. Outside, the winter wind whistled through the walls. Jon could almost imagine Daenerys' army creeping closer through the snow, or the beating of great leathery wings heralding the arrival of her dragon overhead. At last they agreed on a course. Tyrion would write to Melara, urging her to spread rumors of other culprits for the caravan raids. Sansa would finalize new distributions of Winterfell's guard, ensuring swift deployment if a threat approached from any direction. Arya would gather local scouts with intimate knowledge of the roads, so they could intercept any infiltrators or advance Targaryen forces. Jon, meanwhile, would prepare a response to Lord Royce, advising him on the stalemate's developments in the south and reassuring him that the north was still prepared to aid if Daenerys advanced. Thus the days turned again, each one dragging them deeper into a web of uncertainty. The Vale's standstill wore on, with neither side delivering a decisive blow. Daenerys' lines in the south continued to fray, and her frustration reportedly grew by the hour. Whispers of her mounting anger reached Winterfell, describing how even her closest advisors tread lightly in her presence. Some said she was haunted by betrayal after betrayal, seeing enemies in every corner of the realm. Others claimed she was searching for any sign of weakness in the north, longing to prove her authority by subjugating Jon Snow once and for all. Every new rumor felt like a tightening coil, a promise of an inevitable storm. And still, Winterfell endured. Snow fell in gentle flurries some days, in furious blizzards on others. The labor of forging scorpions, carving bolts, reinforcing ramparts, and organizing supplies never ceased. At night, men huddled around hearths, muttering about the uncertain future, some cursing the day they might have to face a dragon's wrath. Women and children prepared themselves to flee within the castle's deeper corridors, should the horns of war echo across the yard. Jon took little solace in the small victories. Reports that Daenerys' troops had lost more wagons in the wilds of the Reach barely coaxed a tired nod from him. He grieved the necessity of sabotage, the knowledge that innocents in the caravans might be caught in the crossfire. Yet, as each day passed without an open march on the north, part of him breathed a quiet sigh of relief. This was the reality of his choice, stepping onto a path where moral lines blurred, all to protect the home he loved. Late one evening, as the winds howled outside, Jon found himself in the crypts beneath Winterfell, a torch in hand. The flames illuminated the stony faces of Stark ancestors, their statues solemn in the gloom. He approached his father's effigy, Ein Stark, carved with a quiet dignity. For a time, Jon simply gazed at the stone face, remembering how, as a boy, he yearned for even a fraction of the belonging his siblings had. Now he was called a king, or once had been, and bore a secret lineage that tied him to dragon's blood. Yet none of that brought peace. Quietly, He spoke to the silence. I wish you were here, to tell me if I'm doing the right thing. To stand against someone who once might have been an ally. Someone who could help make the realm better. But I can't trust her, not anymore. His voice echoed faintly. The crypts offered no reply, only the soft flickering of light on ancient stone. Jon lingered, letting the chills sink into his bones, reflecting on how impossible it was to see a clear path through the knots of politics and fear. When he finally turned to leave, he felt no clarity, but at least he felt a measure of resolve. He would not yield to tyranny, no matter how it cloaked itself in old promises. Ascending the steps, he re-entered the warm corridors of Winterfell, returning to the swirl of hushed voices and uncertain alliances. Sansa was waiting for him in the corridor near the library, her breath coming quick. She held a scrap of parchment clutched in her hand, eyes bright with urgency. There's a new raven, she said, handing it over. From the Vale. Jon's stomach twisted. He unrolled it, scanning the lines by the glow of a nearby sconce. Message was brief, but enough to grip his heart. Daenerys' army has begun to advance, constructing ramps and siege towers despite the snow. We fear the final assault is imminent. The men stand ready, but we cannot hold forever. If you plan to intervene, we will welcome any aid. If not, may the gods help us. Jon closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. The time for subtlety might soon be over. War was poised to break upon the gates of the Vale, and the question remained whether the North would rush to stand beside its allies or keep its forces in Winterfell, bracing for an attack on their own walls. He looked at Sansa, reading her determination and dread in equal measure. We have to decide, she said softly. Our men there can't hold alone if Daenerys truly commits. But if we march, we could leave the North vulnerable. Jon's jaw set. The words of Ned Stark echoed in his mind. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. He had vowed to protect the Vale's stand against tyranny. To do otherwise now might unravel every alliance they'd so carefully cultivated. He summoned Tyrion and Arya, gathering them into the nearest chamber. It was small, barely holding a table and a few chairs, but it offered privacy. With the Raven's message read aloud, they stood in a tight circle, the torchlight dancing on their grim faces. Arya's voice was the first to break the silence. I'll go, she said, surprising them all. Let me lead a smaller force, quick, light on our feet. We can slip through the mountain passes, support Royce from inside. We won't leave the entire North undefended, but it'll show we stand with our allies. Jon studied her expression, saw the fervor in her eyes. She was no child. She had proven herself time and again. Yet the thought of Arya in the thick of a dragon assault made his heart clench. Are you sure, he asked gently. This won't be like a covert mission. If Daenerys unleashes her dragon, it's a full-on battle. Arya nodded, unwavering. I'm sure. Let me take some of our best rangers and archers. If we can sabotage siege equipment, pick off officers, we might tip the balance. We know how to fight in winter better than anyone. Nedim? Tyrion placed a hand on the back of a chair. It's risky, but it aligns with the same strategy we've used. Swift, targeted actions rather than a massive open confrontation. If we draw too many men from Winterfell, Daenerys might take advantage. But a small force led by someone as formidable as Arya Stark could make all the difference. Sansa looked torn, glancing from Arya to Jon. I don't like the thought of you in harm's way, she admitted, voice trembling slightly. But I see the merit. Declan and Royce need help, and we can't just abandon them. Jon felt the weight of leadership pressing down, but Arya's plan was sound. Finally, he drew in a breath and nodded. Take 50 of our best. Maybe fewer if you think you can move faster. Provisions for a swift journey. If Daenerys sees a smaller contingent, she might not realize how crucial you are until it's too late. Target her siege works, sow chaos, buy Royce time. Now. Arya dipped her head in quiet acceptance, already planning. I'll leave at first light. They spent the remainder of the night preparing. Arya personally selected rangers with wilderness experience, men who could climb crags and traverse snowy passes without leaving an obvious trail. She chose archers with keen eyes, men and women, unafraid to fight in harsh conditions. Their gear was light, no heavy armor that would slow them in the mountains. Only well-padded leathers lined with fur. They packed minimal supplies, counting on the ability to hunt or forage if necessary. Before dawn, in the ghostly gray light, the small force gathered in the courtyard. Horses stamped anxiously, breath pluming in the frigid air. Jon stood beside Arya, adjusting the clasp of her cloak. The siblings exchanged a solemn look. "Keep yourself alive," he said softly. "We've lost too many already." She smirked, the old confidence shining for a moment in her eyes. "I won't die for Daenerys' folly." Sansa came to bid her farewell, the two sisters embracing in a tight hug. Then Tyrion stepped forward, offering a short bow. "Go with cunning, my lady," he said, "though I suspect you have more than enough of that to spare." Arya smiled grimly, swinging into the saddle. Around her, the assembled men and women waited in tense silence. Jon raised a hand, giving the signal, and the gate swung open to reveal the snow-covered road that led away from Winterfell's protective walls. With a final nod, Arya urged her horse forward. The group set off, disappearing in a swirl of white. Jon and Sansa remained in the courtyard long after the riders vanished, the whistling wind filling the silence. The sky was pale, threatened by low-hanging clouds that promised more snow. In that moment, Jon felt the lines of battle stretching like threads across the realm, some leading to the Vale, some to the Reach, and some winding inexorably toward Winterfell itself. There was no escaping the storm that was coming. They could only hope that each calculated move kept them one step ahead of the wrath coiling in the south. When at last they returned inside, Sansa murmured, "We should see if any new ravens arrived overnight." Jon agreed, the words echoing in his mind. Each letter, each sign, could bring tidings of doom, or perhaps the faintest glimmer that reason still lived. For now, they could only pray that the small band under Arya's command would reach the Vale in time to shift the tide. If not, Daenerys' assault might sweep away their allies in one swift stroke, leaving the north more isolated than ever. He placed a hand gently on Sansa's shoulder as they walked down the corridor, trying to convey a steadiness he only half felt. No matter what came, they would stand together, as Starks, as Northerners, as a people who refused to kneel before a power they no longer trusted. The flickering torches lit their path, and behind them, the heavy doors of Winterfell closed, shielding what little warmth remained within, as the vast white wilderness stretched all around.